I need to confess something. Last Christmas, while everyone else in the office was packing up early, sipping cheap champagne in plastic cups, and making small talk about vacation plans, I was sitting at my desk, staring at a cardboard box with my name on it. Not a gift basket from a vendor, not the generic company swag bag with a mug and some socks. No, this box was different. It was from my boss. At first glance, that might sound like a compliment. A personal touch, maybe. But here's where it turned strange. Within minutes of the box being dropped at my workstation, I got a call from HR. Not an email, not a Slack ping, but an actual call. Their tone was clipped, urgent. Do not open it. Do you hear me? Don't touch that box. Can't you see what's happening? The words froze me in place. Everyone else was laughing and shuffling papers into tote bags, and I was just sitting there, staring at the package as if it were ticking. It didn't look threatening. Brown cardboard, shiny red ribbons slapped on top like an afterthought. But the return address stopped me cold. It wasn't the company office. It wasn't even from a vendor. It was my boss's home address. Now you have to understand the context. In our company, we had strict rules about gifts. Anything over $25 had to be declared, logged, and in some cases returned. No exceptions. Every year, training modules screamed the same mantra. If it looks suspicious, it probably is. And here was my boss, the same man who had lectured our team about compliance during Q4, sending me something directly, bypassing the official channels. HR's warning echoed in my head. Don't open it. I reached out anyway, my fingers brushing against the coarse cardboard. My instinct screamed to just tear it open and end the mystery, but then another thought intruded, darker. What if this wasn't a gift at all? What if it was a setup? The ribbon was oddly tight, cutting into the edges of the box. The weight felt off, too heavy for cookies, too small for wine. When I tilted it, something shifted inside with a dull metallic slide. I swallowed hard. My coworkers were drifting out, wishing me Merry Christmas, oblivious. I muttered something back, pretending everything was normal, while my palms began to sweat. The longer I stared at the box, the clearer it became. This wasn't generosity. It was bait. So I did the only thing that made sense. I walked it straight to the front desk and asked security to log it under chain of custody. The guard looked at me like I was paranoid, but when I explained, his expression changed. He tagged it, locked it in a safe, and handed me a receipt. Walking back through the quiet office, I caught sight of my boss's door, closed as always. Behind it, I imagined him smirking, waiting for me to take the fall. I didn't know it yet, but that decision to not open the box, to follow protocol, was the first step in uncovering just how deep his games went. If you've ever had that gut feeling that someone in power was trying to corner you, or that a simple choice could be the difference between survival and ruin, stick with me. Because what started as a Christmas present turned into a corporate chess match that nearly destroyed my career and ended with his. And if you've ever been caught in office politics or felt like the system was designed to chew you up and spit you out, you'll want to hear this. So before we dive deeper, do me a favor, hit subscribe, drop a like, and stick around. This isn't just a story about a box. It's about revenge, karma, and how one man's arrogance became his undoing. When HR told me not to open the box, I thought they were being overly cautious. But within an hour, I was sitting in a windowless conference room with the head of compliance, a security officer, and my HR partner. That should tell you everything about how serious this was. They slid a laminated copy of the company's gift and hospitality policy across the table. It was practically scripture at this point, updated every year, drilled into our heads during endless training modules. Anything above $25 in value must be reported. Alcohol was a red flag. Electronics were a double red flag. And absolutely no employee, especially a manager, was supposed to send gifts directly to a subordinate's home or desk without logging it. Chain of custody is everything, the compliance officer reminded me. You don't touch it, you don't open it, and you definitely don't take it home. I nodded, even though my stomach was in knots, because what they didn't know, what I hadn't yet told them, was that the return address wasn't just my boss's home. It was his condo downtown, the one he bragged about during team meetings, the one he kept as his bachelor pad, even though everyone knew he was married. That meant one of two things. Either he had physically boxed this himself, or he had gone out of his way to make sure the paper trail looked that way. Neither option was comforting. They scheduled an official opening of the box with witnesses present, but in the meantime, the object itself sat locked in security, and all I could think about was why. Why me? Why now? The next morning, the office was a ghost town. Holiday lights twinkled over empty desks. The smell of stale cookies lingered in the break room, and the hum of the printer sounded like thunder in the silence. I wandered past reception, where the guard nodded stiffly. He knew about the box, too. Everyone did now. News traveled fast, and gossip moved even faster. That's when I noticed something that didn't fit. The delivery log. Normally, all packages came through the central receiving desk, logged by name, badge, and timestamp. But this one hadn't. The courier had walked it straight past the receiving desk and left it directly with me. That shouldn't have been possible. I pulled the CCTV footage, and sure enough, there it was. A delivery guy in a plain jacket, head down, no signature, no ID badge. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before disappearing out the revolving doors. The timestamp? Exactly the same moment my boss was supposedly across town in a client meeting, except he wasn't. Later that day, a colleague casually mentioned spotting him in the lobby around the same time. And when I checked the parking garage logs, his car badge had pinged the gate within 5 minutes of the delivery. So either my boss had a twin, or he had been a lot closer to that box than he wanted anyone to know. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking together in my head. A personal delivery, outside protocol, timed perfectly when the office was half empty, a courier with no record, and a boss who could have easily walked it up himself, but didn't. It wasn't generosity, it was precision. By the end of that day, my HR partner looked rattled. She admitted that she'd gotten a strange call from my boss earlier in the week, asking about how gifts were logged. He had phrased it like small talk, but now, in hindsight, it sounded more like reconnaissance. The first crack in his facade was showing, and while most people might have ignored it, or chalked it up to paranoia, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about me. This was bigger. I went home that night, the office lights fading behind me, but the image of that box still burned into my mind. I couldn't help but picture it sitting in the security safe, silent, waiting, a trap disguised as generosity, a test wrapped in ribbon. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one being watched. They scheduled the opening for the following morning. No holiday cheer this time, just a sterile conference room, harsh fluorescent lights, and 3 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. My HR partner, a compliance officer with a clipboard, and a security supervisor wearing latex gloves. The box sat in the center of the table like some cursed object. The red ribbon, now frayed from handling, still clung stubbornly to the cardboard. For a moment, nobody touched it. We just stared, the hum of the ventilation system filling the silence. Finally, the security supervisor slit the ribbon with a box cutter. He peeled back the tape with slow, deliberate motions, as if half expecting something to jump out. The lid flaps creaked open. Inside was tissue paper, thick, glossy, patterned with little gold reindeer, innocent enough. But beneath that, nestled carefully as if on display, were 2 items. The first was a bottle of whiskey. Not just any whiskey, an imported single malt, with a retail price north of $300. I didn't even need to check, I knew. It was exactly the kind of over-the-limit gift our training modules warned us about. The second item was worse. A small, sleek USB drive in a black velvet envelope. Like it was meant to be presented, not hidden. Embossed on the flap, in silver lettering, were the words, From me to you. My heart dropped. The compliance officer's pen froze halfway through a note. HR let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The security supervisor slid the envelope into an evidence bag without opening it, his face unreadable. But the damage was already done. Because everyone in that room knew what it meant. Possession of undeclared electronics, especially storage devices, was a compliance nightmare. If I had opened that box alone at my desk, if I had even touched that USB drive, there'd be no undoing it. Chain of custody would be broken. And suddenly, whatever files were on that device could be pinned to me. The compliance officer didn't waste time. He ordered forensics to image the drive under lab conditions. Later that afternoon, we got the preliminary report. The USB contained client data, confidential files, contracts, pricing models, internal memos, dumped sloppily into a folder labeled Q4 Strategy. The timestamps were recent. The metadata? Created under the login credentials of my boss's assistant. It was a perfect setup. If I had opened it, if I had so much as plugged that drive into my laptop, I would have been holding the smoking gun. And my boss? He'd be in the clear. He could shrug and say, I don't know why they had those files. Maybe they were careless. I sat there in stunned silence, watching the compliance officer leaf through the printed report. HR rubbed her temples like she had a migraine. The room felt heavy, oppressive. Finally, the compliance officer looked at me. You understand what this means, right? If you hadn't brought this in, I nodded slowly. Yeah, I'd be done. But even as the weight of it pressed down on me, a darker realization cut through. This wasn't random. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. This was deliberate. My boss had built a trap. I replayed every interaction with him in the past month. His forced friendliness, his casual questions about how strict compliance really is, his offhand jokes about holiday surprises. Suddenly they all felt like rehearsed lines in a play he had written. The whiskey was bait, the USB was the knife, and I was supposed to be the fool who cut myself. As the meeting adjourned, the compliance officer gathered the evidence bags. The box was sealed again, tagged and logged, but I couldn't stop staring at it as they carried it away. The ribbon, the tissue paper, the absurd message on the velvet envelope. It was too clean, too theatrical. That's when it hit me. This wasn't his first time. The whiskey and the USB drive weren't just suspicious, they were deliberate. And if there's one thing I've learned about corporate predators, it's that they always leave a trail. Sometimes it's arrogance, sometimes it's sloppiness. But it's always there if you know where to look. So I started looking. First, the delivery. I pulled the badge access logs for the day the box arrived. Sure enough, my boss's card had pinged the garage entrance just minutes before the courier showed up at my desk. The timestamp lined up almost too perfectly with the CCTV footage. He wasn't across town in some client meeting like he claimed. He was right here, lurking. Next, the whiskey. Compliance had tagged the bottle, but I wanted more. I asked a friend in procurement to check the vendor accounts. After a little digging, he found a charge on the corporate card that matched the brand and batch of whiskey exactly, purchased just days earlier. The buyer, my boss's assistant, and the kicker? The bottle was marked as client entertainment, strike 2. Then came the USB drive. Forensics had already imaged it, but I requested the raw metadata. Buried in the file properties clear as day was the creator ID, my boss's assistant's network login. Not only that, but the files were copied from a restricted shared drive that only 3 people had access to. I wasn't one of them. He was. Strike 3. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. A courier with no record, a bottle of whiskey purchased on the company's dime but disguised as a gift. Sensitive client data dumped onto a USB drive tied to my boss's assistant, and all of it funneled directly to me. But it wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. I circled back to reception, where the same guard who'd logged the box into security now shifted nervously under my questions. You remember the courier, right? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. He wasn't wearing the standard badge. And when I asked for ID, your boss waved him through. That was the break I needed. A direct sighting tying my boss to the delivery. The more I dug, the uglier it got. I found email snippets where he'd asked IT about USB encryption policies. I uncovered Slack messages where he joked about holiday surprises and compliance being such a buzzkill. And then there were the calendar entries, block chunks of time labeled simply drop. It was like he thought he was untouchable, weaving this little trap in plain sight, confident no one would ever challenge him. But I wasn't about to let it slide. I started documenting everything. Every screenshot, every access log, every witness statement. I kept a running file, time-stamped and backed up to a personal drive he couldn't touch. It wasn't just self-preservation, it was insurance. Because the more evidence I gathered, the more one truth became clear. This wasn't about me. I wasn't the first. Digging back into old security logs, I found at least 2 other incidents, suspicious packages delivered during holiday lulls, both brushed off at the time as mistakes. The recipients? Former employees who had been quietly terminated months later for compliance violations. And just like that, the pattern snapped into focus. This wasn't a prank. This was a system, a method my boss had perfected over time. He'd been planting evidence, orchestrating gotcha moments, and pinning them on people who couldn't fight back. And now he'd aimed it at me. Only this time, he miscalculated. Because instead of walking straight into his trap, I was building one of my own. By the time I had gathered enough evidence to convince myself this wasn't paranoia, my boss must have realized something wasn't going according to plan. He summoned me to his office. Not a meeting invite, not a Slack pin. He appeared at my desk, leaned in with that forced smile he always wore in front of others, and whispered, "Let's talk. Now." His office was dim, blinds half closed, the faint smell of cologne mixed with stale coffee. He closed the door behind me, clicked the lock, a detail that made my chest tighten, and gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. On the desk sat another bottle of whiskey, cheaper this time, open with 2 glasses already waiting. "Relax," he said smoothly, pouring himself a drink. "It's Christmas. We should celebrate. That whole HR thing with the box? Blown way out of proportion." He chuckled as if we were in on some private joke. You know how compliance gets. Always making mountains out of molehills. I didn't laugh. My hands stayed folded tightly in my lap. He leaned forward, eyes sharp now. "Open the damn box, share a drink with me, and forget about it. Nobody needs to know." That was his first mistake, because I already knew what had been inside. When I didn't respond, his smile faltered. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something harder, colder. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said, his voice flat. "You think HR is your friend? They're not. They'll bury this just to avoid the paperwork. And when they do, who do you think they'll side with? Me or you?" There it was, the threat dressed up as advice. I tried to steady my breathing, but my pulse was hammering in my ears. "I followed policy," I said quietly. "That's all." He snorted. "Policy? Policy won't save you. You're not a team player. That's your problem. Always hiding behind rules instead of trusting your manager." That line, "not a team player," was a weapon he used often. I'd heard him sling it at others right before they vanished from the org chart. It wasn't feedback. It was a warning shot. Then came the gaslighting. He shifted gears so smoothly it almost caught me off guard. Suddenly he was smiling again, softer this time. "Look, maybe I overstepped. Maybe the gift wasn't the best idea. But you're taking it personally when it was just generous, a gesture." He tilted his head as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Honestly, I'm worried about you. This paranoia, it's not healthy. You need to trust people more." I stared at him, biting down the urge to laugh. Paranoia? I had logs, footage, receipts, witnesses. This wasn't paranoia. It was proof. But he wasn't finished. He stood, walked around his desk, and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I like you," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "I don't want this to go anywhere ugly. So let's just agree this was nothing. You'll thank me later." I froze under his grip. It wasn't a pat. It was pressure. Firm, insistent, meant to remind me of the imbalance of power. When I didn't respond, he pulled back, eyes narrowing. "Suit yourself," he muttered, dropping into his chair. He scribbled something in his notebook, deliberately loud, like a judge recording a verdict. I walked out of that office shaking, not from fear, but from the clarity that hit me. He was doubling down, and he was confident HR would let him. That night, my HR partner called me from her personal phone. Her voice was low, tense. "Listen," she said, "he's pushing hard to make this disappear. If you don't have everything documented, airtight, he'll flip this on you." I assured her I did. Every log, every screenshot, every timestamp. But even as I said it, I knew she was right. Because in companies like ours, politics mattered more than truth. And if it came down to my word against his, I'd lose. That's why the next morning I went beyond HR. I filed an anonymous report through the corporate ethics hotline. That triggered something bigger. An external auditor. Someone my boss couldn't wine and dine, couldn't intimidate, couldn't silence. It was a risky move. If he traced it back to me, I'd be done. But at that point, I didn't care, because the trap he set for me was about to snap shut on him instead. The company holiday party was supposed to be harmless. A rented ballroom at a downtown hotel, strings of white lights draped across the ceiling, a DJ playing generic pop remixes too loud for conversation. Employees sipped watered-down cocktails and pretended to enjoy the rubbery chicken dinner. I wasn't planning on staying long. My nerves were already raw from weeks of watching my back, and the last thing I wanted was to be stuck in a room with my boss. But part of surviving in corporate was optics. You had to be seen. So I showed up, smiled politely, and clutched a soda like it was a shield. Of course, he was there, center of attention, laughing too loudly, hugging people he barely acknowledged during the work week. He thrived on these events, where alcohol blurred judgment and hierarchy became theater. Around 9, he took the microphone from the DJ. "Ladies and gentlemen," he slurred slightly, "before we wrap up this incredible year, I just want to say how grateful I am to this team." A round of applause followed, perfunctory. Then his eyes found me in the crowd. "And hey," he continued, pointing toward me, "some of you might have heard about a little gift I tried to send." Laughter rippled through the room. My stomach clenched. "It was just a bottle of whiskey," he chuckled, "and maybe a little something extra, just for fun. But apparently compliance thinks I'm running an international smuggling ring." The room erupted in nervous laughter, but I noticed the way HR stiffened. The compliance officer standing near the bar froze mid-sip. The DJ awkwardly cut the music. He kept going, digging deeper. "Can you believe it? A man can't even show appreciation anymore without it turning into a federal investigation. What's next? No Christmas cards, no candy canes." His words, meant as a joke, were anything but. In trying to dismiss the situation, he had admitted publicly, into a microphone, that he had sent the package. Worse, he hinted at knowing what was inside. I could almost hear the click of the trap springing shut. People shifted uncomfortably, some whispering. A few managers avoided eye contact altogether. HR was already typing furiously on her phone. The compliance officer slipped out of the ballroom, no doubt to document what had just happened. I stood still, heart pounding, but my face calm. I didn't need to do anything. He was doing it for me. The rest of the evening blurred. I left early, my head buzzing, not from alcohol, but from the surreal realization that he had just given me the smoking gun. Not in a file, not in metadata, but out loud, in front of dozens of witnesses. The next morning, the ethics hotline escalated the case. An external auditor was officially brought in. And now, instead of a he said, they said situation, there were recordings, witnesses, and a timeline that couldn't be ignored. For the first time since that box landed on my desk, I felt the balance shift. The weight wasn't crushing me anymore. It was pressing down on him, because he hadn't just set the trap. He had walked right into it. The investigation moved quickly once the external auditors came in. Unlike HR, they didn't flinch at his title or reputation. They weren't colleagues who had to worry about awkward elevator rides the next morning. They were outsiders with clipboards, mandates, and no patience for corporate theater. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning in the largest conference room on the executive floor. Long polished table, glass walls, blinds drawn for privacy. On one side sat the auditors, compliance, HR, and legal. On the other, my boss, flanked by his attorney and his assistant, who now looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. I wasn't at the table. I was invited only as a witness, sitting in the back row with a folder full of my notes. It was strange, surreal almost, to watch the man who had terrified me with a locked door and a hand on my shoulder, now fidgeting with his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. The auditors opened with facts, not accusations. The whiskey purchase traced to the company card, the USB drive traced to his assistant's login, the courier footage showing him personally waving the package past security. And finally, the pièce de résistance, the audio recording from the holiday party. There he was, slurring into the microphone. It was just a bottle of whiskey, maybe a little something extra, just for fun. Played in the sterile silence of the boardroom, stripped of context and laughter, it sounded damning. His lawyer tried to spin it. It was a joke, taken out of context. The auditor didn't blink. A joke corroborated by documented evidence, purchase records, and multiple witnesses. Strike. Then came the metadata from the USB. Timestamps, login IDs, file hashes, irrefutable digital fingerprints tying the drive to his office. His assistant shifted in her chair, eyes darting. Finally, she cracked. "He told me to do it," she blurted, voice trembling. "He said it was harmless. Just a way to test compliance." The room froze. Even HR leaned back, wide-eyed. He whipped his head toward her, fury flashing across his face. "Don't you dare!" "Enough!" One of the auditors cut him off sharply. From there it was a cascade. Every attempt to explain away the evidence crumbled under the weight of documentation. Every denial contradicted by logs, receipts, or testimony. His charm evaporated, his temper flared, but nothing stuck. In the end, the committee's decision was clinical, almost anticlimactic. He was found in violation of company policy, ethical standards, and compliance regulations. Effective immediately, he was suspended pending termination review. His bonus for the year was revoked, his leadership role was rescinded, and the case would be escalated to the board for final action. He sat there, pale and silent, staring at the polished table as if it might swallow him whole. HR announced additional measures, mandatory retraining across departments, a new gift and data ethics initiative, and reassignment of his HR partner into compliance education for failing to escalate earlier incidents. When the meeting adjourned, people filed out quietly as if leaving a funeral. No one congratulated me. No one patted me on the back. It wasn't triumph. It was procedure. But as I walked past him, I caught his eyes. The same man who had tried to crush me with a smile, who thought he could bury me under a box and a USB drive, now looked small, beaten, stripped of the arrogance that had shielded him for years. Karma hadn't come with fireworks. It had come with paperwork, timestamps, and a voice recording, and it was enough. In the weeks that followed, the office slowly returned to its routine. The holiday lights came down, the stale candy canes disappeared from the break room, and the buzz of gossip dulled into silence. But something fundamental had shifted. My boss's name vanished from the org chart overnight. His corner office stood empty for a while, blinds drawn, until one day facilities staff rolled in a cart and cleared it out. No farewell email, no staged moving on to new opportunities announcement on LinkedIn. Just absence, the kind that leaves a hole you don't notice until you realize how loud the silence feels. People avoided talking about him, but I could sense the relief in the way they carried themselves. Meetings were calmer. Deadlines felt less like threats and more like targets. HR started taking compliance training seriously, not as a box to tick, but as something real. As for me, I didn't get a parade. I didn't expect one. Instead, I was called into a quiet meeting with the compliance director and HR. They thanked me for following protocol, for documenting everything, for not panicking when the box first landed on my desk. Then they offered me something I hadn't seen coming, a retention package and the chance to lead a pilot program on gift and data ethics. It wasn't about money, though the raise was nice. It was about control. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving someone else's games. I was setting the rules. I accepted. On my first day in the new role, I printed out the revised gift and hospitality policy. Fresh ink, new signatures, tighter language. I slipped a copy into a folder at my desk, not because I needed it, but because I wanted a reminder that one box, one reckless move, had almost ended me, and how choosing not to open it had saved everything. That night, I cleaned my desk. In the bottom drawer, I found the flimsy red ribbon from the package. I almost threw it away, but instead, I tied it around an empty cardboard box and set it by my trash can. Not as a trophy, but as a container for scraps and notes, destined to be shredded. A box that once could have destroyed me was now just a waste bin. And as I turned off my monitor, the office lights dimming around me, I felt something I hadn't in months. Calm. Not triumph, not vengeance, just peace. If you've ever been cornered by someone who thought they were untouchable, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's simply surviving, documenting, and letting the system, slow as it is, do its work. Because in the end, he wrote his own downfall. All I did was refuse to play along. So if you've stuck with me through this story, thank you. And if you've ever had to navigate the minefield of office politics, I hope my experience gives you a little strength. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and share your own story in the comments. Because trust me, there are more boxes out there than you think.